Welcome to Remembering You, a space for slowing down, seeing again, and gathering the parts of yourself that the world asked you to forget.
Each week, we wander through stories, ancient, personal, and collective, to explore how perspective changes everything. How what we look at and how we look can open doors to who we truly are.
Take a breath, feel your feet.
You've arrived.
Let's begin remembering you.
We pray to the podcast gods on high.
Are we in eyes wide shut right now? Is that what's happening?
Something's happening. Something's happening right now, my love.
Ta-da! Welcome.
Hello, friends. If you are enjoying this podcast, Remembering You, we ask that you take a moment and do us a solid. Take just a few seconds and share with someone that could benefit from these types of conversations. And we would love to have more folks connect with us. And we're doing this through the old-fashioned way, word of mouth.
Mm-hmm. Boo, advertising and marketing. None of us need more ads in our lives. We also had one other announcement that we wanted to share before we talk about third person perspective. So starting Wednesday, January 7th in 2026, we're going to begin hosting a free online gathering twice a month. It's called...
How much does it cost?
It's free.
Free.
Totally free.
Free.
And it's called The Circle. And you can sign up on our website. We're going to put a link in the episode description below. Each time we get together at The Circle online, we're going to explore a different theme. It could be anything like working with our shadows. Like, what the heck does that mean? Or how do we navigate conflict? Or how do we find more stillness and more presence in this super busy world that we're all navigating? But it's not just going to be theoretical conversations. It's not going to be navel gazing. We're actually going to practice and do things together.
We designed the circle to work like a human skill gym. We use the structured games, meaningful conversations, and supportive reflections to build the foundational muscles of emotional intelligence. Mm-hmm. Just like you can't learn to drive a car by reading about it, you have to get in and actually drive. Just like this weekend with my 15-year-old who was learning to drive stick.
How'd that go?
It was an adventure for sure. He did great.
Good.
So awareness is something that you learn by doing, and the circle is going to be a gift for all of us to continue to build and expand and explore our depth of awareness.
Mm-hmm. So to get a little concrete, really what this means is we'll be working on core skills of connection. So that is things like naming our emotions, with clarity instead of just saying, oh, I'm fine. Maybe we can get some nuance to what that means. We can listen with presence rather than just preparing the next response that we have in our head. We can ask questions to other people that genuinely open up a conversation without, leading them or without shutting down the conversation. And we can learn how to stay curious, even in moments when it's hard and difficult and we feel uncomfortable instead of just reacting.
Throughout our lives, Alison and I have been part of many different groups. Some very simple and yet powerful practices have been a part of those connections, and they have been a part of our transformational process. And so what we're doing is creating a space where we can come together and share some of those gifts that we've received in our lives. So we wanted to create a space where those of you listening can meet one another and practice together. We'll use individual reflection, small group connection, and whole group dialogue, all held in a strong container. It's a place to learn and to lean into what it means to find true human connection. It's okay to be a little messy. That's a part of life. And we're going to all gain skills of what it means to clean up and grow up together. If that sounds like something that rings true in your heart's desire to continue to move forward in your personal development, we'd love to have you join us in the circle.
So go to rememberingyou.life, look for the circle right at the top of the page, and sign up today. Thank you.
Well, let's continue with our ego development series. Today, we're stepping into the third person perspective. Raise your hand if you have ever ended a day with a longer to-do list than you started with. Maybe a new certification on the way, and yet you still feel like you're somehow behind. The voice that says, when I reach that goal, then I'll feel better. Welcome to the third person perspective. This is where the modern world lives and where most of us are quietly exhausting ourselves. Or take this quick test. When someone is wrong on the internet, do you feel a physical urge to correct them with sources? Do you secretly rank podcasts, diets, parenting systems from evidence-based to anecdotal garbage? Today we're talking about the stage that involves the phrase, well, actually.
I absolutely had a phase that looked a whole lot like that.
Well, actually.
Yes. So we are entering the stage of development where, like Ryan already said, the vast majority of the general population in a modern industrialized world are pretty likely to be solidly planted here. And depending on the study, anywhere from 50, even up to 80% of people are here. However, just a few years ago, Global Leadership Associates, that is Bill Torber's group. So he was the gentleman in this field of research that translated all of this psychological, academic sounding language into a corporate landscape and made it much more accessible to just the average everyday person. About 3 years ago, they updated their distribution averages across all of the different stages because they did a retrospective study and they saw that in the 5 years prior to that, there was this huge shift out of third person perspective and up into fourth person perspective. So according to their data, and keep in mind, the people that are typically assessed by GLA are leaders and team members that are in big global companies across a wide range of industries. And that's not exactly representative of the general public, but their data shows 39.3% are in third person perspective and 60%, 60.5 to be exact, are in fourth person perspective. When you consider that 10 or 20 years ago, there were only about 10 or 15% of people who were testing in fourth person perspective. And now, at least in GLA's data, it's 60%. That's an enormous growing up in our cognitive, our perspective taking capacity. And that is genuinely very exciting on the one hand. It's also a little concerning on the other. And we're going to talk about why maybe this can be both a super wonderful thing and maybe not sometimes a so wonderful thing.
There are challenges and joys in each stage that we find ourselves in. Why don't you give us a quick thumbnail sketch? What is this third person perspective all about?
Yeah. Short definition is third person perspective is just the ability to stand back, to be able to see yourself, other people, the situations that you're in from a bit more distance. So it's a little bit like being an audience member watching a movie on the screen, and you know you are an audience member, and so you're not so involved in the story anymore. So you can kind of compare options more broadly. You can reason abstractly. You're not fully embedded in the group's rules. You can start to critique them and improve them and maybe even create some of your own new rules.
So a callback to our previous episodes in this series, using the dream analogy. When we're talking about first person perspective, you are the dream character. And then in second person perspective, you feel what the other characters are also feeling in the dream. And now in third person perspective, you wake up inside the dream and realize you're the director. You can zoom out, see the whole set, also rewrite the script and ask what actually works best here.
It's a huge, huge shift. In second person perspective, your sense of self, like your identity, is heavily created by the roles that you play in your life and what the group's opinion is of you. So in other words, people that are in second person perspective, they mostly think of themselves through the lens of what is it that I do for other people? So I'm maybe a mother, or I'm a soccer player, or I'm the good student who gets the good grades because that's what my family and my culture has told me is really important for me. Or I'm the really dedicated hard worker who's providing financial security for my family because that's what's expected of me. In third person perspective, our identity starts to shift in a really important way. And it means that we can now make it something that is much more individualized. Robert Kegan from Harvard, he calls this stage self-authored. So we can now kind of become the author of our own lives rather than living by what other people expect of us. So rather than our roles and our rules, our sense of self comes from things like what our beliefs are, the achievements that we have, and things that are more objective and rational.
Let's take a moment and pause just so we keep a few things in mind as we move forward. Going from stage one to another is not like climbing straight up a flight of stairs. Development is much messier than that. It's not a linear experience. So when we're stressed, we can crash down into a lower stage of development and spend an hour or a whole day or a couple months. And that's normal. That's a part of the process. So, quote, higher stages of development do not automatically create better people. They're more complex, not necessarily more virtuous or wise. As we move through the stages of ego development, what actually increases is our capacity, our ability to hold multiple perspectives, to be comfortable with ambiguity, and operate easily in complex systems. But that doesn't automatically give us emotional maturity, compassion, or psychological health. Alice-Ann mentioned earlier that in the last 5 years, we're seeing a lot of people in corporate and professional environments testing at later stages than they used to. That makes sense. Those systems have become faster, more complex, and interconnected. They demand higher levels of sense-making. But here's a key point. Adaptation to complexity is not the same thing as wisdom or wholeness. You can be functioning at fourth-person perspective and still be eaten up with anxiety, defensiveness, emotional avoidant, and deep disconnection from your body and even relationships. Development doesn't erase your attachment wounds, trauma, or coping strategies. It just gives them bigger operating systems to run on. Sometimes later stages can make our personal dysfunctions even harder to see and to work with. So ego development tells us how we're making meaning, not how healthy we are, or how kind, or how free we feel inside.
Yeah, that's a hugely important thing to keep in mind, that just because we have broader perspectives available doesn't mean that I'm happy and free and everything is wonderful.
I love that Ram Dass quote where he says, if you're an asshole before you're enlightened, then when you're enlightened, you'll be an enlightened asshole.
Exactly.
Thank you, Ram Dass. In heaven.
It's perfect. So let's get a little more specific about what is happening at third person perspective. We got 2 stages of development here. The early one is called the expert stage. And then later in third person perspective, we move into what's called an achiever stage. Fundamentally, third person perspective is really a shift into a much more subtle world. And that's going to be a pattern that continues to emerge with each stage. Things are just going to keep getting more and more subtle, more and more complex and nuanced. I think to help us with this, it's time to talk about an idea that Robert Kegan from Harvard really brought into sharp focus during his early days there, because I think that'll give us a way to understand the structure of how our ego is shifting. And that is something called the subject-object shift. So psychologically speaking, An object is anything that I can step back from and I can observe it from lots of different perspectives. I can evaluate it. I can optimize it. I can deliberately manipulate it. I want you to think of the same way that anything you hold in your hand, and you can kind of turn it around from every angle, and you could hold it upside down. You could drop it on the floor and see what happens when you do that. So psychologically, when we get the ability to do that with more and more subtle things, that is what grows our ego development. Something that we are subject to is really whatever it is that we still think of as me. It's the parts of our reality that are unquestioned and they're invisible. They're like a pair of glasses that we have on our face and we don't realize we're looking through. So I'm going to give you as many of examples of this as I can, but I'm going to give you one to start with. In second person perspective, we are had by our judgments and our assumptions. We can't really stand back from them and look at them objectively. Our judgments are just what feels true about reality around us. They don't feel like judgments at all. They just feel like facts about the world. And so we don't even question them because we can't even really see that they're there. But at third person perspective, there is this rather profound shift that gradually starts to take place. And eventually we notice, oh, I'm having a judgment, or I am making an assumption. And so I'm going to give you an example from my own personal life. So let's say you are a white Midwesterner like me, and there's a Thai restaurant in your neighborhood and you really like Thai food, and it's run by a family from Thailand. And so they look different than you, they talk differently, their food is very different than what you grew up with, and you always treat them politely because that is what your parents taught you. So that was your second person perspective rule that you grew up with. You are supposed to be kind to people even when they are different than you. And yet, every time you go into that restaurant, you feel a little uncomfortable and you haven't really thought much about why. Like, you enjoy the food. You know that racism and treating people differently based on how they look is not something that's acceptable, especially these days. And yet, still there is just this low level discomfort in your body. And at third person perspective, for the first time, you can actually see what is happening inside of you. So you might notice like, oh, I'm having a judgment. I'm making an assumption about these people. So you become aware that it's their skin color or their accent or the unfamiliar symbols that are hanging up on the restaurant walls, all of those decorations from their home country. It's triggering a meaning-making pattern in you. And now that you can see it, you can start to look at it more closely and you can see the story or the narrative underneath. And maybe that story is something like, well, being different means that I'm unsafe, or being different means that they're inferior, or being different means I don't quite belong here. So what's important isn't whether you like those judgments. I don't really know anybody that likes judgments that they have. What's new is that you can see them at all. So at second person perspective, those meanings are running in the background. They're invisible. They simply were your reality. And now at third person perspective, they are becoming objects of your awareness. They are something that you are having, not something that you are. And that single shift creates this huge universe of choices, because now you can reflect, you can start to question, you can really feel the discomfort that you have without automatically acting it out or needing to defend against it. You can hold this tension between here's what I was taught and here's what I believe, but here's what I'm actually feeling on the inside. And so it doesn't make the discomfort just go away magically. Development is really never that quick. But it does mean that this inner landscape that I have is becoming much more visible. And now that it's visible, it's something that's workable and changeable in a way that never really was before.
For about 20 years, I was a runner where I would run at least 4 times a week, sometimes 5. And it was a part of my process of getting stress out and just pounding the pavement. There was something that I realized that I wouldn't do when I would ran, and that was I wouldn't wear a ball cap along with a hoodie. If it was cold or rainy, it just like I could wear a ball cap, but I could not put a hoodie on over that ball cap.
What a strange rule.
Isn't that a strange, like there was just something inside of me that, nope, I can't do that.
Huh.
And it wasn't until after the birth of one of my kiddos, and we were at a playground, and the older kids were playing, and I think I was swinging them, and the new little one was in a stroller, little buggy, and someone was also at the park, and they were jogging, and they had a ball cap and a hoodie on. And immediately I was on high alert. Like every cell in my body was in defense mode. And I was especially aware of where my wife was and where our little one in their stroller was. It took me a little while to figure out, okay, what is going on and why am I having this reaction? When I was about 7 years old, my mom had just had the birth of her 3rd kiddo, and myself and Jonathan, who's 2 years younger than I am, and this new baby, Kevin, were on our way to the Children's Museum downtown Columbus, Ohio. And as we are walking, Mom is pushing the stroller with this infant with one hand, and her other hand is holding her purse. A guy comes running up behind us. He is wearing a ball cap and a hoodie. And I noticed that he's running up behind us. He grabs my mom's purse and runs down an alley. My mom looks at me and says, "Stay with your brothers." And she is very athletic, takes off down the alley chasing him, screaming at him, "Give me back my purse." Anyway, he eventually jumped a fence and got away. But that programming that I wasn't aware of was so subtle that it wasn't in my consciousness until I started to gain some awareness of my own sensations in my body. So in that shift from person 2 perspective to 3rd person perspective, there began to be some awareness of, oh, I perceive people who wear a hat and a hoodie and are jogging as something negative because of my experience. And also, I am not going to wear a hoodie when I'm jogging with my ball cap on.
Yeah, I think developmental psychology, for me, when I started learning about it, that light bulb of, oh, this is what racism is about, or this is what, sexism or bigotry, whatever the ism is, that's what this is actually about. And that understanding created in me, I don't know, it just kind of relaxed something in me. Like it made the world seem not so mysterious and scary anymore. Not that it makes racism okay, or, just those automatic assumptions we have about how other people are or what they're doing or what they're not doing. But it gave me the capacity to see more clearly the underlying structure of how it happens, because otherwise the only thing we have is just to conclude, well, you're just a bad person. And that it's not like sophisticated enough. It doesn't quite create any kind of change or transition, or, it's like, what do we do with that? We just tell people that we're terrible. It doesn't work. It doesn't make anybody shift.
Even to this day, I don't like it when my kids wear a hoodie over their hat.
Sure.
I don't say anything.
No, of course.
I am very guarded, but there's just something inside of me that's like, that's not good.
Yeah.
And it's something that was a part of my experience. And so therefore it is part of my programming. Yeah. It's the system that's running in the background.
Yeah. But you now have the objective capacity to see it, and you know how to place it appropriately. It's not something that causes you to react anymore.
When that thought or that visceral feeling of, oh, they're wearing a hoodie over their hat comes through me, I don't say it.
Yeah.
Like there's no need, because there's no problem with them wearing a hoodie over their hat.
Right.
And it's just something that's a part of my early childhood programming that now I'm aware of, but there was a time that I wasn't. Which that makes me think of one of my great grandmothers. So sweet, so loving. This is the great grandmother who taught me how to make homemade chicken noodle soup.
Yum.
Like homemade noodles. I remember sitting in her kitchen and learning how to knead the dough and roll it out, and then cut the noodles and then cook the noodles, and such
delicious
good memories. And then I have to remind myself that I never took my basketball card collection over to Grandma's. And there was a reason why. Grandma loved to watch basketball, and she would talk about Michael Jordan as if he was a god and amazing. She just loved the way that he could fly and dunk and handle the ball. It was pretty cool to have a great grandmother who was so into basketball. And she, without even knowing it, would refer to MJ with racial slurs.
Yeah.
And she didn't do it to be mean or unkind. It was a part of her programming that she just was not aware was inappropriate.
Yeah, and I imagine a million people could have told her, you know what, that word is not okay anymore. And she just wouldn't, like, it wouldn't even make any sense to her. It just wouldn't click.
It would have gone in one ear and out the other.
Yeah.
And there were unkind things that she did say to people of different colored skin than what she had.
Sure.
And it was just the way that she saw them, the people around her. There was no arguing with her or debating. It caused a lot of pain. I watched my mom just feel devastated when things would come out, and it just was very uncomfortable for all of us.
Yeah. And I think, that kind of ties back to what you said earlier about how higher stages of development don't necessarily make more, moral or virtuous people. Because it's a totally separate state, like a line of development, not stage of development. It's a different line of development. Like our morality and our ethic is something very different from this thing that we're exploring here, which is all about cognitive perspective taking. So you can have somebody who's incredibly intelligent, maybe from like a cognitive perspective, but lacks emotional intelligence or moralistic intelligence. And that is how you get the whole spectrum of human messiness. Yeah, your grandma's a beautiful example of that. So besides our judgments, let's talk about some other things that are coming online at this expert stage of development. One of those is rules about how people should be. At the expert stage of development, rules aren't something that just exists in manuals. They actually live inside of the relationships that we have. So now at this stage of development, we can see like there's actually these unspoken family rules. There's these norms that I have in my relationships. There's this sense of, here's how adults are supposed to act, or here's the right way to be able to communicate or to be a parent or to argue or to apologize. And so, maybe you'll have this rule that says something like, a good partner, they check in by a certain time if I'm out with my friends, or responsible people, they don't spend money that way. What is object at third person perspective are the rules that are guiding our proper behavior. What we can't quite see yet is if I understand and I follow the rules, and that means I'm okay. And if you don't, then something is wrong with you. And so that's why experts can kind of sometimes come off as like this morally superior thing. If you're doing something that violates their rules, they'll probably let you know about it. And it can be a bit confused about like why other people aren't following the rules that seem to them to be so obvious. At the expert stage of development, people are automatically and unconsciously kind of put into a category of you're either dependable or you're not dependable. You are competent or you are not competent. You either have good self-control or you don't. They'll see you as, you're somebody that I can rely on, or you're not somebody that I can rely on, or, you're just somebody who's always going to drop the ball, or you're somebody who is actually very capable. So they're really good at assessing other people's behavioral competence as well as their own, but they still have a deep need for predictability and for correctness. And so that makes this stage of development especially sensitive to things like emotions, especially when they get a little volatile, or things like ambiguity, or people who don't self-regulate themselves properly. So I think immediately of how in corporate America, I would hear a lot, keep your emotions out of it. There can be this sense of like, I have to be self-contained and I can't say something that is too messy. And then that means that I am competent and I am achieving some level of self-mastery, but actually we're just, suppressing what is true because this is not comfortable yet. So I think, Ryan, I feel curious what this stage of development was like for you as a more spiritually oriented person, because I think it's easy to see the expert stage of development in a very scientific or technological kind of way. But of course, people like yourself absolutely experience this stage of development too. So can you give us an example of how this played out in your own life?
Absolutely. The first story that comes to mind is related to the King James Bible. So the idea around this version of the Bible, it is the best among some circles. So there is an idea that the Textus Receptus, King James, way back in the day, sent out a request to have all of the texts from the Greek and the Hebrew scriptures to be sent to him and for them to be compiled into a canon of scripture. And that took place. And so there is a school of thought within evangelical fundamentalist Christianity today that says the King James Bible is the only inspired word of God. All of the others have somehow been tainted by man's knowledge and wisdom, and King James is the only one that is far superior. And so there was this sense in my experience, and I didn't necessarily get it from my parents. I got it from some churches we went to, and then definitely Bible college and seminary, that if you walked into a congregation and the minister was not reading from the King James Bible, then he obviously wasn't following God to the full letter of the law in the closest and most perfect way that he could, because he was reading out of the NIV or the ESV or the name whatever translation or paraphrase of scripture that was being read out of. If it wasn't the King James, then you weren't a part of the King James only crowd. And it was superiority. It was definitely us versus them. And it was a rule that if it wasn't followed, it right away was looked at as these people are obviously not as dedicated or close or don't love God the same way that we do.
Yeah, it kind of reminds me of the way we hold up in the scientific community, there's certain schools that you're supposed to go to. Those are the better schools, or the prestigious ones. Or, if you get your paper published in this journal versus that one, then that clearly matters a whole lot more. Like there definitely is a ranking system that comes online real hard at this stage of development. And of course, we still feel it in our culture today. Like it's still very much alive and well.
It is. Within religion, which is already oftentimes created from the foundation of us versus them, a tribal like mindset, there are just little nuances, secret handshakes, and little signals that we're part of the in crowd. And just like the alma mater of I went to the right school, or I have all of the right credentials. And so there's this oftentimes a looking down one's nose at everybody else because I did it the right way.
Yeah. So at expert stage, people are kind of automatically and unconsciously sorted as either, you're competent or you're incompetent. You're trained or you're untrained. You're doing it right or you're doing it wrong. So the expert might be still very rigid and still a bit judgmental. Other people's inner motivations, like what it is that's going to drive another person to do something or not do something, that is something that they can't really see yet. And that is what comes online at the next kind of shift into later third person perspective at the achiever stage. So now it's almost like their inner compass begins to follow kind of like, what is it that's going to motivate this person, or what do they want, or what incentives could I offer them that's going to move them into a particular direction. And so that, if you think about it like from maybe a workplace or a corporate context, this allows for a lot of flexibility to be able to delegate what needs to be done because we can see very clearly who's going to want to do X versus Y. It gives us a much broader capacity for influence to be able to coordinate lots of different people and systems together. And so we can make shifts and movements across much larger scales than we could at third person or at the early third person perspective. It might sound like I can see that if I frame the argument this way, then they're probably more likely to agree with me. Or if I give her this bonus, then I know that she'll push herself harder. Or, he really likes recognition. And so I'll put him in front of the clients where, he's going to get that recognition. On a more personal level, at the achiever stage, so we get much better at kind of managing our partner's emotions or our friends' kind of reactions. So we might think to ourselves, you know what? I know that they're going to get anxious if I don't respond to this text very quickly. Or I know that if I reassure them up front, this conversation is going to go better. Or maybe if I just wait until they're in a better mood, they're going to be more receptive to me. On the surface, that might look like emotional intelligence, but they're not quite there yet. It's a step in the right direction. Instead, their partner's emotional state is something that they need to optimize in order to achieve a desired outcome. So rather than being something that they can meet and stay with or be changed by, the underlying question is, how do I manage this so the interaction goes well? Not, what is this like for them from the inside? So it's not really true presence yet. That'll happen at fourth stage. When a loved one is struggling at the achiever stage, we might default to something like problem solving or reframing or giving them action steps to follow. And so we might say things like, well, here's what I think you should do next. Or, you just feel better if once, you did this, or let's make a plan. We'll try to tackle this together. Underneath is a genuine desire to help, but also there's a discomfort in just really being with somebody who isn't moving towards a resolution. The person is being supported toward a particular kind of goal. They're not really being met where they are. I imagine, Ryan, you probably see this in your work in hospice care. Like I imagine there are patients or family members who who just, they don't know how to sit in the intensity of whatever is happening to them. And maybe they want you to like give them a way to solve the problem that they're facing. Or I'm curious how this shows up in your world.
Yes. So there is a really deep groove, I think, cut in our world today that wants everything to be fixed quickly.
Yeah.
And with the shift from curative care, how do we fix this problem so the patient can get better? That shift to palliative care, how do we keep this person comfortable mentally, emotionally, physically, and spiritually at the end of their life, can feel like there's a letting go of power, control, agency, even certainty. And there is an adjustment period oftentimes that not just the patient, but also loved ones will experience as they're reframing the experience of needing medical care and attention, and how does that play out at the end of life. I could tell stories about family members that pressured, cajoled, manipulated, almost forced their loved one to participate in PT exercises, because if we can just get mom or dad or grandma moving again, then we'll get them out of bed. And if we get them out of bed, then we can get them into a chair, and if they can get into a chair, then they're going to be able to somehow regain quality of life and get back into a normal experience. When it actually comes down to, if the body is at the end, there's no amount of PT, even though I know some pretty amazing physical therapists, they're not getting up out of that bed. And it can be a challenge to communicate that to a family, and also to give the patient permission to say, no, I don't want to do this. And it's not giving up. It's actually coming to a place of agreeing with what's true.
Right. Yeah. And so all of this mean, like, this stage of development, it doesn't mean that the achiever stage can't love, or that they lack empathy, or that the relationship is just toxic and doomed. It just means that this stage can't quite see the full scope of what it means to be in a relationship, like the messiness of it, the ambiguity, the complexity. They want to see improvement. They want to see effectiveness. There's this belief almost that my worth is determined by the outcomes. And so they can kind of be sort of blind to the emotional cost of all of this constant optimization. And of course, this is where we get lots of burnout in our culture, and we get over-identified with our achievement. There's almost like, when I see people talking about AI, and they're talking about, what are we going to do when or if AI takes all of our jobs? Like, how am I going to make sense of who I am if I don't have a job to go to anymore? And that is entirely this late third person perspective talking.
It's an existential crisis.
Yeah, right. Right. Yeah, like you can't make sense of who you are if you don't like have a job to go to every day, or something to always be working on. So the third person capacity doesn't just emerge in our own individual lives. I mean, we've been talking a little bit already that it also exploded in a cultural kind of modern world context. So from a historical point of view, it started in the Renaissance. It really flowered in the Enlightenment, and it is what created the scientific revolution in our modern society. And for the first time, there were whole domains of human inquiry that were differentiated. They were separated from that fusion of our second person kind of rule that we always have to follow the church or whatever tradition it was that we grew out of. And now we can individually follow whatever line of inquiry we need to. So within science, they could ask, what does the data show? Not just, is this going to be consistent with scripture? Or within like law and ethics, they could ask, goodness could now be based on a rational argument and the consent of the people who are being governed, not just the divine right of kings, for example. And so this third person differentiation of science and art and morality and law and every other kind of thing that is important to us in culture is what gave us the scientific method. It gives us modern medicine. It gives us capitalism. It gives us liberal democracy. Without third person perspective, none of that happens, which obviously we need in a society. So it's very, very cool kind of what's happening here at third person perspective.
And you can clearly map this on history. In the early modern world, the 15 to 1700s, it looks a lot like expert. There's this obvious grabbing a hold of the scientific method. There are all of these legal procedures and classifications that are nailed down. And later in the modern world, the 18 to 1900s, it looks like the achiever, in the expression of how we focus on growth and productivity and scale, efficiency, the optimizing everything in our experience. The psychological move individuals make from expert to achiever literally mirrors the historical move our entire society made as modernity unfolded. And so this brings us to today. Because that third-person achiever mindset, rational, individualistic, scientific, merit-based, is no longer the dominant force among the cultural elite or, as Alice Ann's stats show, in leadership today. For the last 50 years, and accelerating rapidly, the fourth-person pluralistic perspective has emerged. This is the postmodern mindset. And the collision between these two worldviews is the culture war. It's not just political, it's a developmental conflict.
Yeah. From a developmental perspective, the conflict that we see play out on our political stage and just culture in general kind of makes perfect sense, because the fourth person perspective is the next stage, and its entire job is to make the third person perspective kind of the thing that is wrong. So it's the first stage that can see that whole third person perspective worldview as a system. And so what it sees when it looks at the third person perspective is really all of the things that are wrong with it, so to say, or all of its shadows. It doesn't see objective truth. It sees a system that is built by a group, historically, usually white European men, and that has tended to marginalize a lot of other perspectives. So it sees the way that reductionistic science has turned nature into a resource that we're now just plundering. It sees the way that we've turned humans into cogs into a machine. It sees that meritocracy is kind of a myth, and that ignores systemic inequality and racism and patriarchy. And that creates a divide that is very hard to resolve from either one of those perspectives.
And on the flip side, third person perspective looks up at fourth person and is terrified by what it sees. It's the objection of objective truth in favor of, quote, my truth or your truth. It sees a process paralysis where meetings go nowhere because feeling included has become more important than getting things done.
When we move from one stage to another in a healthy way, what happens is we're moving to a higher stage, so we're transcending it, but we're also including everything that came before in the previous stage. When we transition in an unhealthy way, so if we move up to fourth person perspective, but we're rejecting everything at third person perspective, in a sense, we can develop an allergy to the stage that we just grew out of. And so in a sense, it throws the baby out with the bathwater. And so the baby in this case is objective truth and reason and medicine and human rights. And the bathwater is colonialism and patriarchy and reductionism. And we end up with these entrenched, huge divides that feel painful and impossible to find a solution for. And so this really is the painful impasse that we're in. We've got both sides of the aisle, so to say. They're digging in their heels, and both are partially right. From the third person perspective, the achiever did create incredible breakthroughs in freedom and in medicine and lots of other areas. And the fourth person perspective is correct that this system does have a massive shadow of inequality. Like nothing means anything if it's all just rational. The conflict is a sign of growth, as painful as it is, and it can only be resolved by the next stage, by the later fourth person perspective stage, which is able to finally see everything that has come before it in a more inclusive way. It's kind of the first one to be able to see the value in both systems, in the later third person perspective and the earlier fourth one. And that is what we will be exploring a little more in our next episode. So we'd like to end with a short practice to help those of us who went through or are in this third person perspective, who really identify with achievement and outcomes and metrics. And so we can start to feel the difference between doing well in life and being fundamentally worthy, no matter what it is we achieve or don't achieve. So I'd like you to close your eyes or settle in or find a quiet space just so you can turn your attention inward to your own experience. And I'd like you to bring to mind something that you're currently striving toward, a goal that you have. It could be a project that you're working on. It could be some future vision of success. It could be a role that you would like to inhabit. Maybe you want to get promoted. And I'd like you to imagine everything working out. And so notice what happens inside of you when you imagine everything working out just the way that you want to. You can feel that lift, that lightness. Maybe there's a sense of relief or just a feeling of okayness. And now let's gently imagine that this goal doesn't turn out the way that you want to. It was nothing catastrophic that happened. It was just incomplete. There's something about it that is less successful than you had hoped for. And notice how your body shifts. Does something tighten? Does something feel heavy? Very often, the body will tell you. It'll kind of give away how it is for you. And I want you to ask yourself very honestly, what story about your worth, about who you are, gets activated when you succeed? And how does that differ from the story about your worth that gets activated when things don't work out? And without questioning or arguing with those stories, I want you to see if you can sense something that's underneath them. Can you find a quieter presence, a simple aliveness that is part of who you are? It is a part of you that has been here your whole life, that has existed before you wanted to achieve this goal or get that promotion. See if you can rest your attention there on this simple sense of being for just another breath. And I'd invite you to very gently say that my worth and my value as a human did not enter with this goal or with this project. And it won't leave with this goal or project either. Yes, achievement can still matter, and the effort still matters. But instead, we're just loosening this knot where our identity got tied to our outcomes in life. And so take another breath. Just return to your body. Wiggle your toes. And when you are ready, you can open your eyes.
Beautiful, my love. Thank you. Well, friends, that's our exploration of the third person perspective, the expert and the achiever. It's the stage that built the modern world and built the self that many of us recognize as me.
And as we also saw, it is a stage that's got some deep shadows, and it is in a profound conflict with the emerging fourth person perspective that we're going to talk about next week. So we will dive into that head first, into the pluralistic and the strategist stages. We're going to explore the world of systems and context and this idea of self as process. What the heck does that mean?
Thanks for listening, friends.
Be ridiculously kind to the part of you that just wants to be perfect and excellent. We will see you next time.
Next time on Remembering You.
Remembering You.